Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. It looks like you're pretty interested is how the heart reacts to like extreme weather, right? So we've got some really cool sources to look at today.
Yeah.
A video on cardiac output from Alila Medical Media with some super clear visuals, a NOAA article on the heat index, and a few other pieces on heart health.
Yeah. It's going to be a good one if you're interested in how, like, those crazy hot summer days can really affect how your heart works.
Right, totally. So let's start with that Alila Medical Media video. They show how the heart, especially the ventricle, basically acts like a super powerful pump.
And every pump's going to have an output, right? For the heart, that's cardiac output, like how much blood each ventricle pumps out every minute.
Okay, that makes sense. But they say that the ventricles don't fully empty out with each beat. There's always a bit of blood left over.
Yeah, that's super important. And that's where understanding these terms like EDV and ESV come in. EDV is end diastolic volume. That's basically the amount of blood in the ventricle right before it contracts.
Okay,
And then there's ESV and systolic volume. That's how much blood is still there after it contracts.
got it.
And the difference between those two divided by the EDV gives us the ejection fraction.
Okay. So in their example, the ventricle starts with like 100 milliliters of blood. That's the EDV.
Right.
And after contracting 60 milliliters left, that's the ESV. So the ejection fraction would be 60%.
Exactly. And here's why that's a big deal. Imagine you're an athlete training to increase their stroke volume. That's how much blood gets pumped with each beat. The bigger the difference between EDV and ESV, the more powerful each heartbeat is, delivering more oxygen to your muscle.
So a higher ejection fraction basically means a stronger, more efficient heart.
Yeah, you got it. And the video goes on to explain that cardiac output isn't only about stroke volume.
Right?
Heart rate also plays a role. So when you exercise and your heart rate goes up,
Uh-huh.
that increases your cardiac output too.
That's wild. Like our bodies just adapt like that.
That's pretty amazing.
So then the video goes into these three things that affect stroke volume.
Yeah.
And they use this balloon analogy to explain preload, which I thought was super helpful.
Yeah, it was a really good way to visualize it. Preload is all about how much the ventricle stretches when it fills with blood. Based on the Frank Starling mechanism,
Okay.
which basically says the more the heart muscle stretches, the harder it contracts.
Like stretching a balloon.
Exactly. The more you stretch it, the faster the air comes rushing out when you let go.
Totally. So when you exercise, your muscles need more oxygen, right?
Right.
So your heart kicks it up a notch, starts pumping harder.
Exactly. That increased pumping stretches the ventricle more, leading to greater preload and ultimately a more powerful contraction.
Got it.
So your stroke volume goes up, delivering all that oxygen your muscles are craving.
That makes sense. The video also mentioned contractivity and afterload. What are those?
So contractivity, think of that as the strength of your heart muscle itself. How well can it squeeze? Afterload, on the other hand, is all about the resistance the heart has to overcome to actually push the blood out into the arteries.
Like trying to inflate a balloon that's already half full.
Exactly. It takes way more effort to squeeze more air in.
Yeah.
And high blood pressure is a perfect example. The higher the pressure in your arteries, the harder your heart has to work to push against it.
Wow.
Same thing with damaged heart valves. They can create blockages that increase afterload. The video does a really good job of showing how these things work.
So there's a lot happening with each heartbeat. It's way more complex than I thought.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But maybe before we get too deep into that, let's switch gears and look at this NOAA article about the heat index.
Sounds good. And this ties right into what you were interested in, how weather affects the body.
Yeah.
It turns out extreme heat is way more dangerous than we often realize.
I know the statistic that really got me was that heat waves kill more people in the U.S. than all other weather disasters combined. Like, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. And the article says that high-pressure systems are often the culprit behind those deadly heat waves.
So how does high pressure make it so scorching hot?
Think of high pressure like a giant lid over a region.
Okay.
It traps heat like a pressure cooker,
Wow.
and it keeps those cooling rain clouds from forming so the temperatures just keep climbing.
But the article says it's not just the heat itself.
Right.
It's the humidity that really makes it dangerous.
Absolutely. Humidity is the key. Remember how sweating helps cool us down?
Yeah.
Well, high humidity makes it harder for that sweat to evaporate.
Right.
And that's what takes the heat away. So even if the temperature isn't super high, that high humidity can make it feel unbearable.
They had a good example in the article to explain relative humidity. Imagine the constant dew point of 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
If the air temperature is also 45 degrees, then the relative humidity is 100%. But if the temperature goes up to, say, 75 degrees, the relative humidity drops to 34%, even though the actual amount of moisture in the air hasn't changed.
That's a great way to show that relative humidity isn't just about how much moisture is in the air,
Right.
but how much moisture the air can hold at a certain temperature. As the temperature increases, the air's capacity to hold moisture also increases.
So even if the dew point stays the same, a higher temperature means the air feels drier, because it could hold even more moisture.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the heat index, right?
You're right. The heat index is a tool NOAA developed to help you figure out the actual risk of that heat and humidity combo. It gives you a much better sense of how hot it really feels to your body, which can be a lot higher than what the thermometer says.
Like a reality check for your body. The article has this chart showing the heat index based on temperature and humidity.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
For example, if it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit and the relative humidity is 45%, the heat index is 109 degrees, which falls into the danger category.
And they make a really important point.
Yeah.
Those values are calculated for shady locations.
Oh.
If you're in direct sunlight, you got to add another 15 degrees to that.
Whoa, so that 109 could feel like 124. It's crazy how much of a difference humidity and direct sun can make. It's not just about the number on the thermometer.
Not at all. The heat index gives you super valuable information that can help you make smart decisions about how long you're outside and what precautions you need to take, especially during those heat waves.
Definitely. We'll get into that more in the next part of our deep dive. But before we do, I want to switch gears again and talk about this heart index idea. We found that in an Arabic source.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. It's basically a way to measure how big your heart is compared to your body size, and it's a pretty important indicator of overall heart health.
Okay, cool. Tell me more.
We'll unpack all the details in the next part of the dive, but
Okay, sounds good.
it's definitely something to keep in mind, especially considering everything we've been talking about with heat and how it affects the heart.
So we've gone from like the mechanics of a single heartbeat to the dangers of extreme heat, and now this heart index. I'm really curious to see how it all fits together.
Yeah, it's all connected. We'll dig into it all next time.
Awesome. See you then.
See, okay, so you're probably wondering, like, how does this heart index thing actually matter to me? You know, especially with all this talk about heat and heart health.
Yeah, totally. What is the heart index and why should I care?
Well, the heart index, it's like a ratio calculated from a chest x-ray. They compare the widest part of your heart to the width of your chest at, like, the level of your left atrium.
So it's looking at your heart size compared to your body size.
Exactly. And it turns out a healthy heart index can really lower your risk of heart disease and stroke.
That makes sense. If your heart's too big for your body, you probably have to work a lot harder to pump blood, right?
Exactly. A healthy heart index basically means your heart is working efficiently for your size. The source mentioned that a normal heart index is usually less than 0.5,
Okay.
though it can vary a little, depending on things like age and gender.
So if my heart index is higher than 0.5, should I be freaking out?
Not necessarily on its own, but definitely something to talk to your doctor about. They might want to do some extra tests like ECGs, blood tests, maybe even some imaging tests, just to get a clear picture of your heart health.
So the heart index is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right. It's important to look at it along with other things.
Got it. But here's where it gets interesting. The source also talks about things you can actually do to improve your heart index.
Yeah, that's the good part, right?
Tell me how to get a healthier heart index.
Well, a lot of it comes down to lifestyle choices, as you might guess. Regular exercise, eating heart-healthy foods, maintaining a healthy weight, and managing stress are all key.
It's like all those basic things we always hear about actually make a difference.
Yeah, they really do.
But what about heat? We talked about how heat affects the heart. Could being exposed to heat for a long time actually change your heart index?
That's a really interesting question. The source didn't specifically say anything about that connection, but it's definitely something to think about. If heat can put stress on the heart, could that stress eventually make the heart change size over time? It's a hypothesis worth exploring.
It makes you wonder about the long-term effects of climate change, too.
Yeah.
Like, if heat waves get worse and happen more often, could that mean more heart problems?
That's a scary thought. And it brings us back to why it's so important to pay attention to the heat index, especially during those super hot summer months.
Right. The NOAA article made it really clear that even if you're not being super active, just being in high heat and humidity for a long time can really strain your heart.
Yeah.
They talked about heat exhaustion and even heat stroke as serious risks.
Absolutely. And remember, those heat index values are for the shade.
Right.
If you're out in the sun, it feels way hotter.
So it's not just about avoiding strenuous activity during a heat wave. It's about being smart about how much time you're spending in the heat in general.
Exactly. Taking precautions like wearing lightweight, life-hour clothing, staying hydrated, and finding shade whenever you can, those things can make a huge difference in how you feel and how safe you are.
What about sunscreen? Does that matter?
Oh, absolutely. Sunburns can actually make it harder for your body to cool down, so slatter on that sunscreen, especially if you're going to be out in the sun for a while.
It's amazing how all this stuff is connected, like from the way our hearts work to how our bodies deal with heat. It's all part of this complex system.
It really is. It shows how important it is to listen to your body's signals.
Yeah.
If you're feeling overheated, dizzy, nauseous, anything like that in the heat, that's your cue to get out of the sun and cool down ASAP.
And if you're worried about your heart at all, definitely talk to your doctor, especially if heart disease runs in your family or if you've noticed any changes in your own health.
Right.
They can help you figure out your risk factors and come up with a plan to stay safe when it's hot out.
Now, before we move on, I wanted to circle back to that thing about lifestyle choices impacting the heart index. The source specifically mentioned how important managing stress is for a healthy heart.
Okay, what do they say about stress? I know it can affect our health overall, but how does it mess with the heart?
Well, when we're stressed, our bodies release these hormones like cortisol and adrenaline,
Uh-huh.
and those can increase heart rate and blood pressure, which puts a strain on the whole cardiovascular system.
Oh, I see.
Over time, that kind of chronic stress can contribute to all sorts of heart problems.
That makes sense, but how do we manage stress? Like, we can't just make all the stress in our lives disappear, right?
That's true, but the source talked about how important it is to do things that help us relax.
Okay.
Like making relaxation techniques part of our daily routine. They specifically mentioned things like yoga and meditation as being good for the heart.
So it's about finding healthy ways to counteract the bad effects of stress on our bodies.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical relaxation either. It's also about mental and emotional well-being, which are just as important for a healthy heart.
Like taking a whole person approach to the heart health.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about what you eat and how much you exercise. It's about taking care of your mind and spirit, too.
Right. So it's about finding things that make you feel good and peaceful.
Exactly. Things that help you de-stress and recharge.
Like what?
It's different for everyone, you know? Maybe it's yoga and meditation. Maybe it's spending time in nature, listening to music, or just hanging out with people you love.
Yeah.
The important thing is to find what works for you and make it a regular part of your life.
And the source even said that if someone can't do Islamic fasting for whatever reason, they could try intermittent fasting as another way to maybe improve their heart health.
Right.
That's interesting. Intermittent fasting has gotten pretty popular lately.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into it, though. Tell me more about it.
Sure. So it's basically a way of eating where you switch between periods of eating and not eating. It's not about what you eat, but when you eat.
Okay.
And there's more and more research suggesting it can have some pretty awesome health benefits, including good stuff for the heart.
Okay, I'm definitely interested. We should talk more about that in the last part of our deep dive.
Yeah, we definitely should.
But before we move on, is there anything else about the heart index from that source that you think our listeners should know?
One thing that really stood out to me was they emphasized that you got to look at the heart index along with other symptoms and test results.
Okay.
It's not like a magic number that tells you everything.
Right.
It's a piece of information that can help guide you to do more investigation and get the right treatment.
So it's about getting the whole picture of your heart health, not just focusing on one measurement.
Exactly. It's about taking that whole person approach, you know, looking at all the different things that play a role in a healthy heart.
And speaking of that, we've been talking a lot about physical health. But what about the mental and emotional sides of heart health?
That's a great point. The source didn't really go into detail on that, but it's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah.
We know that chronic stress, anxiety, and depression can all be bad for your heart.
Uh-huh.
So taking care of our mental and emotional well-being is just as important as taking care of our bodies.
It's all about finding ways to bring more joy, peace, and connection into our lives.
Exactly. Creating a lifestyle that supports our whole selves, you know, both physically and emotionally.
Exactly. And that's a really beautiful idea to carry with us as we go into the last part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive. Remember in part 2 how we talked about fasting and how it might be good for your heart? Well, we're going to get into that a little more now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's getting more and more attention from scientists. The source we looked at specifically talked about Islamic fasting, which millions of people around the world do.
Right. And it's not just a religious thing. It's really tied into cultural traditions that have been passed down for generations.
Exactly. And while the source didn't get super deep into the science, they did say there might be some big health benefits, especially for the heart.
So what's the connection between fasting and heart health?
Well, research shows that fasting can be good for a lot of things that keep your heart healthy. For example, some studies show that fasting can help lower blood pressure and improve cholesterol levels.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. How does just not eating for a while do all that?
It's not totally clear yet, but some researchers think that fasting makes some changes in your body that lead to those improvements. Like when you don't eat, your body starts using its reserves, and that might be good for your heart.
Like giving your body a chance to reset.
Yeah, kind of. And the source also mentioned that fasting can reduce inflammation in the body, which is another important thing for heart health.
Right.
You know, chronic inflammation can cause all sorts of heart problems, so anything that helps reduce it is probably a good thing.
So fasting isn't just a spiritual or cultural practice. It might actually be a really powerful way to improve your physical health, especially when it comes to your heart.
Exactly, and I think it's cool how the source presented this information. They respected both the cultural and the scientific sides of it. They acknowledged that fasting is spiritually important, but also pointed out the potential physical benefits.
It's a good example of how different ways of knowing can work together.
Totally. And they even said that if someone can't do Islamic fasting, they could look into intermittent fasting as another way to maybe get some of the same benefits.
Right. You mentioned intermittent fasting before. Can you remind me how that works again?
Sure. So with intermittent fasting, you basically cycle between periods of eating and not eating. It's not about what you eat, but when you eat.
So there are different ways to do it.
Yeah, there are a bunch of different approaches. One that's really popular is time-restricted feeding, where you only eat during a certain window of time each day,
Okay.
like maybe only between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Another way is alternate day fasting, where you switch between eating normally one day and fasting or eating very few calories the next day.
So it sounds pretty flexible.
Yeah, that's one of the things people like about it. It can fit into different lifestyles and preferences, but it's important to say that, like, any big change to your diet, you should talk to your doctor before starting intermittent fasting, especially if you have any health conditions.
Good point. It's always best to get advice from a healthcare professional.
Now, tying all this back to what we've been talking about, I think it's really interesting how all these different things connect. Heart function, heat, stress, fasting, it all goes back to this idea of looking at heart health in a holistic way.
Yeah, I agree. We've gone from the mechanics of a single heartbeat to how things like heat affect us, and now we're talking about ancient practices like fasting. It's all connected.
And it shows that there's no one right answer when it comes to heart health. It's about figuring out what works best for you based on your own needs, lifestyle, and what you like.
And it's about learning so we can make good decisions about our health.
Right.
Whether it's paying attention to the heat index, understanding our heart index, or thinking about the benefits of fasting, it's all about being proactive and taking care of ourselves.
Exactly. It's about doing more than just reacting to symptoms.
Right.
It's about finding ways to keep our hearts healthy throughout our lives.
That's a great message to end on. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to take what you've learned and use it in your own life. Whether it's making small changes to your diet, finding ways to reduce stress, or just listening to your body, every step you take can make a difference.
And remember, it's never too late to start. Your heart will thank you for it.
Thanks for joining us on this amazing deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay heart healthy.